Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the latest MCU series, Echo. This show stars Alaqua Cox as Maya, who is returning from her role in Hawkeye as this character, as the niece of Kingpin himself, Wilson Fisk, and this show is a great exploration of this character on her own as a standalone piece that is in the Marvel Spotlight banner, which is a new section of Marvel that's meant to stand on its own, where you don't need to do your homework and watch everything else in the MCU, although the first episode does spend quite a good amount of time recapping the events of Hawkeye, kind of leading up from her childhood all the way up through the events of Hawkeye to the events of this series. And so I have a lot of thoughts on this show. Like I said, it's a great exploration of this character, although I do think that this season in general has a lot of ups and downs. And as always, this is a spoiler review, so if you've not seen all 5 episodes streaming on Disney Plus right now of Echo, go ahead and check it out and then come back and let's talk about this series. Viewer discretion is of course advised, because this is Marvel's first R-rated show or movie or whatever it is, and this series is going to be filled with the R-rated stuff with this series, and now of course Deadpool 3 coming out later in a few months here. And honestly, I think that this show does a decent job at building the bridge between what the MCU is at the current moment in time and to what the Netflix shows were back in the heyday of when those shows were as great as they were. For the most part, those series also had their own ups and downs with those ones. But for the most part, I do think that this show does a good job at trying to strike a balance between where the MCU is at now, which means it does have some similar problems that the MCU shows have at this point in time, meaning that it is a stretched out movie rather than a show itself. It is 5 episodes, not 6 this time around. You can definitely feel that this show, especially towards the end of the season, is kind of rushing to the finish line instead of taking its time to build out the story at hand. But let's get into the good first. First of all, Alaqua Cox as Maya in this show is absolutely phenomenal, and it still baffles me that her first role was in Hawkeye, so this is a continuation of her first role ever, and she is really good in this. With the the action sequences, she's really solid in all of that, but just in general, her performance as this character and the emotion that she brings to the arc of her in this season is really good, because she starts off as a cold-blooded killer. She literally shot Kingpin in the face at the end of Hawkeye, which again, that show is kind of important to this, and she is kind of filled with rage at the beginning of this series. Her goal is to essentially become the Queenpin, to take over Wilson Fisk's entire empire of crime and continue to do the things that he was doing. And this show is largely about legacy, spanning from the very first people of the Choctaw Nation all the way leading up to where Maya is at her current point in time, and all the moments in between with all her ancestors representing different parts of her passed down from generation to generation. But then, of course, you have the events that happen in her childhood where, her mother was killed in this accident. She kind of blames herself, but in actuality it is her father who was, part of these crime organizations who decided to cut the brakes on her car, and that's what caused the accident in the first place, which made her an amputee, which made her, go in this place where she leaves off with her father to New York City in not so much of a good standing with, her grandma and her grandfather back in Oklahoma. And so there's some tension there within the family that I'll get to in a second here. But then, of course, she meets Kingpin at that point in time, and he kind of raises her as an uncle, and that is where she gets this violence inside of her. This character where, Kingpin literally beat up this guy because he wouldn't give her ice cream because she couldn't speak. And when Maya sees what Kingpin does to this ice cream owner, who does kind of deserve what he gets in this moment, she also joins in and also kicks this guy when he is down, and she has this violence that's also passed down to her by Kingpin. So she has this struggling balance of who she was in her culture, who she was in how all these generations have passed down all these different qualities to her, but also how this sort of violence is passed down from Kingpin. And is she going to be this violent person that Kingpin was, who killed his own father to become free, to become the person that he was? Is she going to kill Kingpin to become the next version of Kingpin, to become the Queenpin? Or is she going to embrace her culture and her family and all those ties that have been kind of severed in her past 20 years of her life? And that is where I think this show absolutely excelled. And like I said, the show does kind of follow some of the structure of MCU shows in the past, even to a point where the final episode she gets her new costume change. But I think this show actually handled it extremely well because of her relationship with her grandparents. Of course, her grandpa made her new piece for her prosthetic leg, which I thought was a very beautiful moment. I thought this actor, who also showed up, I believe, in The Last of Us, he is so good in this show. And honestly, I can watch literally a drama, full on 24 episode drama about these grandparents and their romance and their broken up, marriage that happened at one point in their lives because of the death of their daughter. And so I love these characters so much. And when it came to the grandmother and this severed relationship of how she couldn't stand at looking at Maya because she also blamed Maya and Maya's father for what happened to her daughter. And so she shut them off and she kind of secluded herself. But then she makes the costume for Maya in this finale that I thought was a beautiful moment that sparked this memory inside of Maya's head to see all the generations of the past. I also loved all the flashbacks that explored her ancestry, with the first woman in the Choctaw Nation to, the Light Horseman story that is told to her, to, the story of her grandmother leading up all the way to her. And just in general, all the characters that kind of surrounded Maya in Oklahoma, including the Henry character who kind of ran the ice skating rink, who is a part of this, crime organization under Fisk, who left to New York City to go here because he wanted to get out of this life, but Kingpin basically, forced him to stay, killed everybody else in his family around him, and, threatened to kill him if he doesn't stay doing the work that he is doing for Kingpin in this world. And so even this character was very sympathetic in this show, and I loved his dynamic with Maya as well throughout this entire season. And just all the characters surrounding her I thought were very strong. Even Biscuit. I actually liked Biscuit quite a bit. I'm talking about this show right after I watched it without hearing any other opinions about this show, and I'm sure some people are going to be very annoyed with Biscuits and be very, because he is a very dumb character. He's the one who kind of says that Maya's back in town to Bonnie's character on accident because he is an idiot. He's going to let things spill, but also he's very charming of an idiot. And again, that relationship that he has with Maya was also very charming. I will say the way they set it up in the first episode with Maya being separated from her cousin Bonnie at the very beginning when they were children, I really wish that there was a moment, an even stronger moment between those two characters where they did reconcile, where they did have a conversation, or there was even just more conflict within those two characters, because as soon as they first, encounter each other, being tied up in the skating rink, I just wish there was more to that. I wish there was more build to those characters finally meeting, finally running into each other, and what that meant for Bonnie as a character. Because I think if any character in this entire series got the shortest end of the stick, it was sadly Bonnie, which I thought, there was a great opportunity to have a lot of heart like they did with the grandparents in this, with Maya's, relationship with her. And I just really missed that in this season, with all the emphasis on family and all the emphasis on the generations that kind of passed down from this Choctaw Nation, from the very first person to who Maya is now, and to, her cousin and all that stuff. I just wish that there was more with that relationship that just felt like it was either on the cutting room floor or they just didn't care to explore that. But the way that it was set up, it had to have been more of an idea on the page. Let's get into a bit of my negatives of this series, because again, I said that there were some great moments again with the character arc of Maya. I thought all of that was near perfect. I'll get into the finale in a second here, but I do think the pacing of this show, these 5 episodes, felt a bit off at times. Like I said at the beginning, was the first episode had like a 25 minutes recap essentially of Hawkeye, which I honestly didn't mind that. It was flying through the storyline. So I think as a new viewer, if you haven't seen Hawkeye, you're probably going to be like, oh my God, they're just flying through all these very important character beats. I wonder why it was in Hawkeye. So I guess I did have to do a little bit of homework before watching this show. But as somebody who has seen Hawkeye and did enjoy Hawkeye for what it was, I thought it was a decently fun recap. I do think the first episode had the best action in terms of the entire, 5 episode run. Really, the first 2 episodes really had the only action. I don't really remember much. I guess episode 3 had the whole ice skating rink thing. I don't really remember much in episode 4 in terms of action. The finale was something else with the finale, but really the first episode had the Daredevil fight, which has been much hyped up by the creators and the marketing team behind this show, and it lived up to every bit of anticipation and hype that they built it up to be. It is a pretty intense fight, and the way that it kind of builds with Maya, kind of stepping out of the fights, taking a moment to get in, but as soon as she gets looped into the fight, the energy really does pick up. And I think of everything, this feels the most similar to what Netflix was doing with the Marvel characters in that run. And I don't think it's as great as some of the hallway fights in Daredevil, but it is a very thrilling sequence. And as soon as Daredevil jumps into the scene and he has his fight with Maya, again, it lived up to my expectations of what that fight was going to be. But again, this is an Echo show. It's not a Daredevil show. So this is all we're going to get of Matt Murdock and Daredevil in this show. But it gets me excited to see what his show is going to end up being and what, Maya's character is going to be in that show. But after this point in time, we get to the actual story of the series. And I do think the pacing of the actual story is, it is a bit slower. It does take its time to build with its characters. It does have moments where the characters can sit down and have conversations besides with Bonnie, but with, Biscuit and with, the grandparents and with all these different moments, I do think that the pacing of that section from episode 1, or I guess the last half of episode 1 to episode 4, I thought did work pretty well. But it is, again, with Marvel and their finales, I haven't had as big of a problem with the Marvel finales as a lot of people have. Honestly, I really like the Moon Knight finale. I kind of get that it's a big CGI action fight, but also it kind of does need to build up to a big CGI action fight. The WandaVision finale, I also didn't mind too much, but I get that it does get a bit repetitive in that sense. I think, Secret Invasion completely dropped the ball on their finale. That was just something else. And I think that this show does something similar, or not actually, it doesn't do something similar. It doesn't, break out into a big CGI action fight. It kind of skips the action. It doesn't really build up to a climax, which I think felt very odd. The last episode is the shortest episode of the series, and it built up pretty well. Again, I liked the character arc. I like her getting her costume. I liked how it meant to her as a character, her growth that she's had up until this point, how it built up with Kingpin. And when it comes to anything inside of the finale itself, honestly, I was more stressed about the possible hate crime that was about to be committed by a bunch of goons of Kingpin. I was a little bit less stressed about Kingpin himself, because Kingpin in this series is good. I think Vincent D'Onofrio has not lost a beat when it comes to playing this character. I think he has some great moments in this series. And, the conversations and the dialogue that he has with Maya and with some of the other characters, with even the threat when he went up to the grandmother at the finale episode, that I was very scared for what was going to happen in that moment. But of course, the way that things play out in the finale happen in the way that they do. So it built up to a point where I was excited to see what Kingpin was going to do, but then they go in a different direction with kind of skimming through this action sequence and kind of dive into the emotions of what Maya and Kingpin's relationship is. And this is where I'll get into some of my confusion with this character and with this season, because I don't really understand Maya's abilities in this show, because I know it's different from the comics. I do believe I read up a little bit. I'm not a comics reader, but from what I read, it seems similar to be like a Taskmaster type of thing with Echo, where she's able to kind of be an echo of the people that she sees around her. She's able to mimic the fight sequences and mimic the fight styles of the people that she is fighting, and that's not the case with her character inside of the MCU. She kind of has her own thing. She is a very skilled martial artist who kind of learned under the thumb of Kingpin, who eventually gets these sort of abilities. Again, with the legacy, it is passed down generation by generation from her ancestors with the Choctaw Nation, and it very much seems to be like a cultural thing with her, having these like glowing spiral hands. I don't really know what this symbol means, but I know that it means something culturally with this character, which I get that. I think that makes sense. I think it's honestly a great change of how, rather than her mimicking the fighting styles of the people around her, she's mimicking the ferocity or the cunning or the love of her ancestors before her. And she's able to use that sort of thing to gain strength in her current moments by taking everything that she was in the past to who she was in the present. I love all of that. But then when she starts, fighting through her grandma and through her cousin, I felt a little bit confused at that. And, her mom was like healing this bird. Did she actually have the ability to heal people? Does she have, actual like abilities rather than just learning from the fight styles of people in her past and her ancestry? I'm kind of confused about her abilities. I don't mind exactly how it was used. I just am confused about exactly what it is. And again, I don't think I'd be harping on this if, that final confrontation wasn't completely skimmed by, because I think the fact that it was kind of chopped up in editing with what was happening outside, with Henry's character and with Biscuits, and then it was cutting back and forth between what was inside the little warehouse with Kingpin and the grandma and the cousin. All of a sudden they just start fighting, and it's cutting between all three of these different things, and I couldn't really tell what was going on because it kind of montages through the entire thing. And I think if they took their time, it could have worked, but it just kind of left me scratching my head because, again, for one, I don't really understand how her abilities works, besides she's connecting to the ancestors of her past and she's fighting through her other family members, which I think I understand up until that much, but again, it was just cut through and kind of montaged through so fast that it didn't really give me time to process what was happening, and it just kind of took the opposite, direction of what the other MCU finales did, which was, big spectacle, big action, big CGI fights. And this one, I felt like they're going to have a grounded fight like you've seen in the Daredevil show when, when I forgot her name, but when she's, tied up and chained in this warehouse and Daredevil shows up and there's a really great action sequence where they're all fighting all these goons. I thought we were going to get something like that in the finale, but really it kind of skipped through all that to get to this mental battle with Kingpin, which I actually did like. I think Kingpin is left at an interesting point at the ending of this show because Maya kind of gets inside of his head, which also is this ability that Maya has to get into somebody's head and make them face their own ancestry and own history with what he did with his father, and how she's telling him to let go of that pain, to let go of who you became because you forced yourself to kill your own father, and you've held on to this anger and this violence for so very long. And again, I like the idea of making Kingpin face that, literally face that in his own mind, and he seems very rattled by that. And I love the fact that he was as rattled by that as he was in this finale, because it kind of puts his mindsets in an interesting place where it gave him a reason to walk away at this point in time. And I think Kingpin was used decently in this season. Like I said, I think he had some great moments, but with it only being 5 episodes, the only confrontation that they can have besides talking and dialogue sequences is this very finale. And same thing with in Hawkeye, he was just in the finale of that, and he had a little fight scene in Hawkeye. And so the Kingpin is just, in the Daredevil show, he's always been 5 steps ahead, but in this and in Hawkeye, he seems to be a looming figure that's always within reach. And I think that is the issue that I have, at least, with Kingpin as he's been used thus far. But again, I do think it puts him in an interesting place, an interesting headspace, and the post-credit scene kind of teases that he might be running for mayor of New York, which, I think 4 years ago you asked me, would Kingpin be able to run for mayor, even though he's literally been put in jail, he's committed so many crimes, and it's been, said in canon that this is now canon with the Daredevil shows, and so he is literally a convicted criminal, but now he's going to go for office. You asked me 4 years ago, I'd be like, that's ridiculous, but we live in our current point in time with certain people in Congress, and I guess that's going to be the direction that they go for the Daredevil show. And I know that Daredevil show is going to have a higher episode count, and they kind of stopped production because of the writer's strike, and they took more time to develop the series and kind of push it in a different direction with new filmmakers. So I'm nervous. I'm cautiously optimistic for that, but they really seem to be putting in the care to make it work. And I trust that they're going to hopefully live up to the expectations that everybody has for the Daredevil series with both Matt Murdock's character and Kingpin's character. But those are going to be my thoughts on the 5 episodes of Echo that we got here today. I'm very curious to hear your opinions on this season because, again, I have not seen any of the reactions out of the show because the critic reactions have not been released yet, and also audience reactions I really haven't looked at just yet, so I'm very curious to hear all of your thoughts on this series. And one more thing before I go, I have to talk about Kingpin's goons. He has a goon problem right now in the MCU with both, the tracksuit mafia in Hawkeye and now some of the goons that show up in this show. He needs some better goons. I don't know where he's going to get them, but he needs somebody better than the people that he's had to go after Maya and after Hawkeye in the past 2 seasons because, I don't know, he has a bit of a goon problem. But if you did enjoy this review, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, see more reviews just like this one. Leave a like. Like I said, comment down below all your thoughts on Echo, and hope to see you all in my next video.